Hello my fellow friends, and welcome back to a new Kerbal Space Program video. Today, a newbie oriented mission, aka guide actually. So if you have issues getting to the moon or you have not been to the moon yet, then this video is something for you. If you have no problems going to the moon and beyond, well then you should check out other videos on my channel. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. And the first thing we have to do is to have a look at the Delta V map, and here we have it. So you have to start at the bottom there where you can see kind of Kerbal, then you can see this first kind of line or something that kind of leads into LKO, and there you can see that you need, according to this Delta V map, 3,400 meters per second of Delta V to get into low Kerbal orbit. Then if you go towards the moon on the left hand side, you can see that we need 860, 280 and 580 meters. That means to get from the low Kerbal orbit into an intersect with the moon, we need around 860 meters per second. Then to get into a low orbit, 280 meters per second, and to land on the moon, 580 meters per second. And these three numbers, since we want to get back from the moon again, we have to kind of just add them twice. So kind of add them all together and multiplying by 2. This way you get more or less the amount of Delta V you need for your vehicle. But since we are newbie friendly and generally speaking I like to plan a bit more Delta V in, I usually go with the slightly bigger numbers just for safety margins. That means we're going to calculate with 900, 300 and 600. This in total gives us then 3,600 meters per second of Delta V. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to build a landing craft that has 3,600 meters per second of Delta V. So let's start here in the VAB. Okay, great. So we are going to do a small and easy moon landing, so that's why we're going to use a regular Mark 1 command pod. Then we're going to slap on top of it a parachute, and otherwise we're going to forget it. So that's why immediately slapping on a parachute. Then followed by a heat shield for the return trip, right? And a decoupler, since we definitely don't want to kind of forget to decouple this thing. I mean, otherwise the heat shield has no purpose at all. Okay, brilliant. Then time to design a lander, and for those of you who know, I'm usually playing with both DLCs, but right now we don't have any DLCs installed, just to show that, to make it even more newbie friendly, so that there's nothing I'm using that the new Kerbal Space Program player has not access to. Okay, brilliant. So where was I? Oh yeah, right. Okay, so this will be more or less our upper stage, and we're going to use an LV909 carrier engine. If you now have a look, it only shows a 572 meters per second in the stock thing. So now we're going to click on this Delta V icon, and first of all we're going to select the moon, and then it automatically goes over to vacuum. However, if you are a Kerbal, by the way, you can change the way the Delta V reading is shown, and actually the thrust weight ratio as well. So since all engines are dependent on the pressure around them, so at sea level you have one atmosphere of pressure, but if you ascend in altitude, so that's why the altitude thing is here, the pressure drops and we get different readings. And in vacuum, obviously it's like 0 atmospheres around you. So this way we can see, if we now select the moon, but we can also see the right thrust weight ratio. So with this stage right now, we have a thrust weight ratio of 9. That means that the engine produces 9 times the force with which gravity is pulling us down on the moon. So the gravity of the moon pulling us down, and the burn time, and obviously of course the Delta V readings. And from now on we're going to use this vacuum thingy, because all the Delta V readings on all Delta V maps are always in vacuum. Okay, brilliant. So we've got 2,000 and something, so that's actually great. So in other words, this is more or less, this is not even more or less, this is half of all this is more than half of our lander, since we need 3,600, just as a reminder here. But we cannot land like this kind of tin can, right? So we're going to add some side-mounted tank. So I'm going to use a decoupler here just to make it a bit more better, more fuel efficient, but you don't really have to bother, it's still just using some. Okay, we're going to take now, where was it exactly, another 4 fuel tanks around the perimeter here, and about science junior. So just imagine this being a science mode or career mode, or even a career mode, then you definitely want to bring as many science experiments as you can with you. So that's why we're going to include all the science experiments with us, just for the kind of guide purpose, right? Apart from the atmospheric one, just to make that. Okay, to explain that, since there's no atmosphere around the moon, there's no point in bringing that one. So we've got 4 mystery goose, we have 4 science juniors, that's more than enough for pretty much everything anyways. And the other reason why we're attaching some of these side tanks is in order to attach landing legs with more clearance, right? And with a wider area to stand on, which makes it even more stable for them. And by the way, for those of you who want to know a small little thing, go into options, advanced vehicles, and enable that. This way you can enable auto strut, which is a really useful feature, so you can just auto strut and fix those parts there so that they won't wobble around in flight. Brilliant. Good, now going just to attach a nose cone, otherwise this would look ridiculous if we're launching that, right? Or once we're launching that. But right now we have here fuel tanks that don't contribute anything to our delta V reading. That's kind of bad, isn't it? So that's why we're going to add now spark engines, small engines here, and have a look. We have now these 4 spark engines firing around, and they provide us 1,500 meters per second of delta V, and our total delta V readings for this entire contraption here are now down here at the very bottom, 3,600. So that's pretty much exactly what we need for our mission. So that's perfect, dead on. There's just one more thing I'm just interested in, having fuel lines. That's just for me personally now interesting, whether this will, by how much this will increase our delta V. That makes literally no sense at all. Could you please explain this to me? Why you not working the way you're supposed to work? You into you. That makes no sense. That's weird now, because, oh, of course, yeah, because I'm a douchebag. I mean, of course, the other way around. My bad. There we go. This would not really increase the delta V by a lot, so we're not going to bother with making this thing more complicated. Okay, anyway, so this is our payload, which we want to send into orbit. It has all the required things, kind of mission requirements set, so we can just now add a nice decoupler down here. Brilliant. Now on to building a lifter vehicle. Because of aerodynamics, I'm going to go with a slightly bigger than you would actually need. It's 1.5. Is that already, or do we need? I think we should pick one fuel tank or something, just to make this a little bit better. This will we be able? Yes, exactly. So there we're going to place a nice fairing for the looks of it around this. This is optional, of course, but you can. I would suggest you doing that, because well, like I said, you don't have to, but that's just visually more realistic, and I like to build my rockets, at least in some ways, slightly realistic. Okay, now we have the 2 meter parts here, so that means we're going to use them as well. Going to take one of these nice fuel tanks and slap on a skipper engine. and then going to take a big decoupler here, like a medium decoupler actually, and big engine. And underneath we take the mainsail. Where is it? The mainsail. Brilliant. And let's add 2 SRBs and have a look at the delta V readings. Though these ones are too big, just the kickbacks. Thank you. Okay, this seems about it. I'll just make you here, and that's good. Okay, brilliant. So we have, if we look at it at the very bottom, we have 7,900, and our total delta V requirements are 7,000. And just as a small add-on, I just wrote on my note here plus 500 for safety purposes, so that totally works out. So just going to finish the rocket, and we will go through the staging, explaining it, and auto strutting this, of course. Otherwise the boosters will be wobbling around, and that's something nobody wants to. Same goes for auto strutting into root part. This makes just the entire length of the rocket more stable, so that's something I would suggest you doing it. If you don't want to use auto strut, then you should really just use 2 regular struts on those side boosters. Okay, brilliant. Last thing, some fins for aerodynamic stability. Okay, now one more thing that's just visually, however, launch clamps. Okay, brilliant. So now onto the staging. In the first stage we have our mainsail and our SRBs. These guys will be producing, if we now switch over to Kerbal, 2.32, a thrust to weight ratio of 2.32. Okay, that's good. After that, the SRBs will be detached. According to the staging diagram, however, the liquid fuel will be running out prior to the solid fuel. So that means, and because our thrust to weight ratio is very high, we're not going to run at 100% throttle. Brilliant. Okay, next up we're going to detach the lower stage here, and then our skipper stage will kick in, providing us 2,100 meters per second of delta V. Brilliant. Then we can detach the fairing. Actually, I'm not quite sure whether we'll actually deploy it a bit earlier. No problem, no, that's fine. And once the skipper is empty, we'll jump over to our 4 spark engines in the lander. And last but not least, more or less the last bit of it will be completed by the central core here. Okay, brilliant. And with that, we can head over to the launch pad. Okay, brilliant. And we have Jeopardy on board. That's awesome. Okay, so without further ado, we're going to press the Z key, jump to maximum throttle. But like I said previously, we're not going to run at 100%. So we're going to go down by to approximately 3/4, and then just hitting space and lifting off. And now we're actually going to reduce throttle a tiny bit more, and that's why, well, because the aerodynamic resistance increases by the velocity squared. So twice the velocity equals 4 times the air resistance, and with that kind of means that we lose a lot more energy fighting against the atmospheric resistance, and that's not something we really want to do. So that's why I'm not accelerating too fast, so that our speed buildup is a bit more gradual, and like I said, we're not going to fight too much against aerodynamic resistance. Now we're at 10 kilometers approximately, so that's when we're going to start tipping over to the 45-degree mark. Now I pressed the wrong button, apologies for that. I actually meant to press increase the throttle, but that's not that big of a deal, right? So now the SRBs are empty, and we're going to cut our throttle and ditch them. Go back on throttle. So actually the idea why we cut our throttle was in order to not exactly not crash into the SRBs, but whatever, it's not a big deal. And we ran out on our mainsail. Okay, now you can just decouple the mainsail, activate at least the skipper, but we're not going to burn just yet. We're going to first deploy the fairing, since we're already very high, and as you can see in the atmosphere, it doesn't really matter anymore, the atmosphere. And now we're going to quickly jump over to the map screen and wait until we're at our apophysis. This ascent type of profile is by no means the most efficient. The most efficient would be gradually toning over, so that you don't have to first of all, that your apophysis is not that high, since it only has to be 70 kilometers, to be quite honest with you. But this is just the easiest, really the easiest lazy method way to get into orbit. You just get your apophysis above the atmosphere, and then you just burn at apophysis approximately. Another tip, if you're doing burns that are quite long and you don't really want to sit through them, you can press Alt and then the time warp key. With that you engage physical time warp, and you can even use that whilst your engines are burning. Now we are and now when the camera rotates, we're almost in orbit, or already in orbit, depends a bit on how long we were burning, and yes, we are already in orbit. Brilliant. Okay, next up we want to go to the moon, so we're going to right click on the moon, then select target to the moon. Next up here, a nice tip: if you don't want or can't use the tracking station in career mode yet, you can just wait, be in the regular camera, wait until just a bit more, and there we go. Wait until the moon will rise above the horizon, and that will be any second now, and there we go. And now select prograde and just burn until you get an encounter with the moon, or if you don't have the tracking station patched, connects until your apophysis is approximately over there. But since we can use maneuvers, we're going to use a maneuver. That means right clicking on your orbit where you want to perform the maneuver, and then just dragging the prograde key until you get this kind of contraption. So next up we're going to left click on the moon and then focus view, and this way you can see how your planned maneuver will end up. Then we're going to go down here on the left corner into this orbit mode, and then click this little icon here. Then we go over to the maneuver. Here you can see how much your maneuver will cost you. You could in theory type in some values, but it's a lot easier just going to the graphical maneuver editor. And here you're going to use all those different tools you have to get this periapsis as close to the surface as you possibly can. So in here you can actually select by how much you will change with each click. We're going to by 10 meters. Let's click on retrograde. Okay, the periapsis goes away from the moon, so let's click prograde. Oh, it gets closer, so let's click it once more, and now we are already too far in, so let's go back by 1 and select a lower scale. Wrong side, and do this again. Okay, let's reduce the scale even more, and there we go, 12 kilometers above the surface of the moon. That seems great. Now let's select the maneuver and burn. In theory we can just jump back to this camera mode, it doesn't really matter. This is just more appealing, whilst this gives you a lot more information. However, we're going to stay here since we're going to stage in just a second. And here we go, staging, and next stage. By the way, just wanted to check, yes, whether I was already burning without having paid attention when the maneuver is, well, yeah, when it is. As you can see here down in the time, we're already past the maneuver node by 1 minute. That's not that big of a deal around the moon, or just generally speaking, since we are almost done with the maneuver node already. However, if your burn time is a lot, like very long, then you might want to split the burn into 2 separate burns. However, more on that in a future video. Now we are very close to completing the maneuver node. We switch back to the map mode, and now we can see the dotted line, the predicted path, and the solid line is our real path now. In theory we can just close now the maneuver node, since we already are close enough in just a couple more tiny adjustments. Now you can just right click on the periapsis and just lower it until we're happy. Going to go now with around, well, 14 kilometers. I wanted to say 20 is good enough, but 14 is even better. So now quick saving, because, well, why not? Quick saves are very good. And if we are kind of in science mode, we can now conduct experiments, be that like this one or just a crew report here, but that doesn't matter since, like I said, we're just in the sandbox right now just to have a look. Another tip, very interesting tip: clicking on your path and select warp here. You will never overshoot your target. And we can just relax and sit back, and here we are pretty close to our periapsis around the moon. We're just 2 minutes out. Now we could do another bunch of experiments around high above the moon, I think. Now we are already spaced near the moon, so we should have done the high above moon on our way in. But anyways, just waiting until we're at periapsis. 20 seconds till periapsis, brilliant. Selecting retrograde to cancel our orbital velocity, and burning. Now as you can see, the camera is turning around. That means we're just about to hit change kind of our path from hyperbolic to orbital to suborbital. So now we're in a high orbit. We're going to continue reducing our orbital velocity to lower our apoapsis around the moon. Going to increase again physical time warp, since that's just very comfortable. Great. Just a bit more. Okay, now our periapsis and our apoapsis are, well, not really that close to each other, but still close around the moon. Now I'm going to time forward around almost one orbit so that we will land on the day side. This is just for showcase purposes. It's better. YouTube makes videos a lot darker, so that's just more convenient, and you have a connection to the KSP. If this were a probe or something, it makes a lot more sense, since you have control once you are in line of sight to Kerbal without a relay network. Since we don't have a relay network yet, that's still important. Anyways, once you're in orbit and more or less can know where you want to land, let's say for example in, don't want to select the moon, thank you, let's say in this crater, then you just reduce again orbital velocity until your blue orbit line is A, suborbital, and B, intersects with the place where you want to land more or less. So now we did that. Now we can just time warp a bit. Now the question is, when will should you start your landing burn? Well, that depends on your thrust weight ratio actually, and on the body you're trying to land. And here on the moon we can still, I think we can wait a tiny bit more. I would say that's just a gut feeling right now. To be honest, I'm going to start burning right now already, but as things seem right now, it is a bit early. But rather starting too early than starting too late. And that's where the additional delta V readings that we added on top just as a safety margin come in very handy, because if you just have the budget to really the lowest possible amount, then you would have to do a suicide burn all the time, aka what SpaceX does with their Falcon 9 landing rocket. So you don't burn, you burn, then you stop and you land it at the same time. If you burn a bit too late, well, you crash. We're doing it the other way around, since we're not computers, we don't calculate these things. You could of course download a mod called MacJeb, then MacJeb does all that work for you. You can just press land at that location and it will land for you with a suicide burn. But I think I like I personally like the hands-on approach a bit more. Same reason more or less. It feel like when I'm driving, I prefer having a manual transmission, just because it feels more to be kind of in power, in control. It's a bit more, it's less precise, less efficient, but more fun. So that's why I would really suggest you guys doing the same thing. Okay, just a few. Now we are very slow, kind of in comparison. 80 meters per second is still rather fast, but not a landing speed. But now we can more or less manage where we want to land, and let's say we don't want to land here because, well, I don't know why. Let's say I want to land over there, like a bit further down the road. Well, then you just deselect the retrograde marker and just point a bit straight up. You could of course select radially out, then it does the same thing for you, and you just kind of delay the timing when you will impact the ground. With that we can see, wait, no, too close. We're translating over there, and we need a bit more to get over this small little ridge here. That's no problem. Very well, now we're pretty much above the ridge. Now you can select retrograde again, and once we completely passed over it and the retrograde marker starts creeping back up, we can ignite our engines and press another time F5. Oh, you cannot quick save. Okay, that's kind of weird, but anyways, just select this retrograde marker, kill the velocity almost, and now deselect it by pressing F, for example. You can quickly deselect it, and then you just have to slowly keep on burning a tiny bit so that your landing velocity is low enough without this light glowing here, and once you've touched down, press X to cut your engines or just throttle everything. And with that we have a successful landing on the surface of the moon. Great! F5. You know, quick saving really helps you. Next up, doing all the science experiments, because, well, you came here for a reason, right? You want to study the moon, get science, to get a lot of data, unlock new parts, and so on and so forth, right? So that would be now this time jumping out and kind of taking all the data from the parts from all the science experiments with right clicking and collect data, selecting yes. Yes. So now I'm not going to collect now the remaining data, since, like I said, it's a science, it's a sandbox, doesn't matter. But for you, you should pick up everything to gain the maximum amount of science, do crew reports, surface samples, everything, and planting a flag. More or less the most important thing of KSP. That's very good. Now you can type the site name, let's say Moon Guide. Has this video, so brilliant. And then let's, do we have Kerbal somewhere? Can we see Kerbal? No, we can see Kerbal up there. Okay, well, not going to get the craft, the flag, and Jebediah on the same screen. So in that case, well, without Kerbal, just a nice pressing F2 to remove your UI, and a nice screenshot, which is the thumbnail, like probably for this video. And once you did that, brilliant, you did all your surface exploration, it's time to head back home and collect the juicy science, right? You want to unlock new things and so on and so forth. Brilliant. Okay. First thing now is to have a look at the map and zoom out a bit. Well, you don't really have to zoom out, but it might help figure you out which way the body is orbiting. So the moon is orbiting in this direction, so you want to go right. And well, what is right in that regard? You take the surface feature that is rather big, and it's this big crater. Now you can zoom out in the maps in the regular screen and try figuring out and turning your camera that way so that you know kind of your position in relation to the map you saw earlier. So we have to go this way, right again. And that means we can zoom back in. We want to go right. Now the question is, what is right on an nav ball? If you don't know, well, apart from the fact that you know that this is north, you don't know whether this is right or this is right? So you can just take off and go to one of the directions. And okay, is this the correct direction? No, we checked earlier, it is not. This is it either. So wait, now I'm really confused. There we go. This is starting to get really weird because I think it should be this way. Did I not look correct? No, this is, oh no, that's actually right. And we are out of fuel, brilliant. Still double checking on the map view since we have enough time, and the apoapsis is in the direction you want to go, brilliant. Then, ditching these side tanks, and if you left the science experiments inside there, then you lost them right now. So that's why it's important to take the data and smack it into the capsule with Jebediah. Okay, brilliant. So now you just do the same thing as with Kerbal, more or less. You just burn prograde, or horizontal, actually not prograde, just horizontal to the horizon once you get enough altitude, and we already had enough altitude to get into an orbit. Now we're just suborbital, not quite orbital, but suborbital. Very good suborbital trajectory, actually. Now you can just wait again until you're at apophysis 2. Circulars. I'm going to increase the apophysis a bit so that it's a bit higher. It doesn't really matter since we have more than enough fuel for that, and I just wanted to go for a bit higher apophysis just as a safety margin again. Waiting until we are at apophysis here. Time warp is still restricted since we're not in a stable orbit. And there we go, we're approaching apophysis. Selecting again prograde and burning until the camera turns. There we go. Now we are in a stable orbit. Correct. Brilliant. Next up, going back to Kerbal. As you can see here, the orbit of the moon. There's one side of the moon on its orbital line that is a bit brighter and a bit darker. The one that is a bit brighter is the path that the moon already took, whilst the one that's a bit darker is where the moon is going. So that's prograde and that's retrograde. Since we want to go back to Kerbal, we want to slow down, and that means we want to go in the right direction from the way the camera is pointing right now. And that means we want to burn prograde in our orbit in relative to the moon, going backwards towards Kerbal. So that's why we're going to burn on the side facing Kerbal, as you can see here. Going to burn prograde and escape the moon. This will reduce the maneuver node is more kind of makes things harder to explain. So we're just going to burn once we're again above the crater where we landed earlier. Is the crater approaching? Okay, we already passed it. That's like very intelligent. Let's just do it once more and just a bit more, and there we go. That's approximately here. Now going to burn until we escape the sphere of influence of the moon. You could of course in theory burn the opposite way, but this is just more efficient. As you can see here, now you can see the orbital path that we will take once we left the sphere of influence of the moon in relation to Kerbal. You can see here our periapsis is dropping once we're continuing to burn prograde. Now we will hit the atmosphere. I would suggest a good low 30, just above 30, on the 30, whatever. 30 kilometers should be good enough. Since we have a heat shield, we are not really concerned with heating. That's good. Where's Kerbal? There's Kerbal. Now we can just fly back to Kerbal. And point retrograde once we hit the atmosphere. Brilliant. And detach our lower stage. If we had enough fuel to slow ourselves down manually, but we have a nice heat shield, so that's not an issue. And we're going with 3000 meters per second, so having a heat shield is definitely a nice thing. And you can see some explosions there on the debris on our other craft. And now, because the camera changed, well, that means that we're no longer orbital. That means we're suborbital if we now go and... There we go. Check. Oh yeah, we're suborbital. Brilliant. And we're going to land on the mountains. Not quite the best landing spot, but whatever. We have a nice parachute, so that's no biggie. And Jeb is always happy, no matter where he lands. We're just going to miss the beat. That's brilliant. Now let's engage the parachute. And this is like literally the worst spot to land on, probably. Now you can, in theory, if you want, you can jettison the heat shield manually. It doesn't really matter, frankly speaking. But right now I'm a bit concerned with the survival of Jebediah. That's just called unlucky, I guess. Okay. Would you please stop the capsule? Now it's just a matter of time until we have decelerated enough to get into a suborbital trajectory. There we go. You can tell that you are suborbital by the change of camera angle, or you can, if you don't trust me, you can just go into the map view and double check for yourself. And then we've slowed down enough. Thanks to our heat shield, we took no heat damage whatsoever. Nothing blew up apart from the other craft, obviously. But that's the lower stage. Sorry, the lower stage. But that's of no importance to us, right? And now we can just glide back down safely to the surface until we hit a nice splashdown. And with that, you should have all your science experiments inside your capsule if you pick them up, like you should do, not like I did, since, well, we're in a sandbox mode, so that doesn't matter for us. But if you're usually doing these kinds of missions in science or career mode, where you do want to pick that juicy science up. So, and with this video, I hope you have figured out and gotten a few ideas on how to do a successful moon mission, and I really hope you enjoyed this video. So thank you guys very much for watching, and until next time, Spaceship signing out.